Assalamu alaikum and hi. In this video, we're going to learn about flowchart. Before we go into the definitions of flowchart, let's first assume that you are given a task as follows. You are required to write a program. It can be in Java, Python, or so on, to take two numbers. Assume that these numbers are integer as input. You need to calculate their sum, the total, and then display the result. Means you need to display the total. If you are a beginner, how are you going to approach these tasks? One of the ways for us to start to tackle these tasks is to draw a flowchart. We know that flowchart is a tool for us to create an algorithms. Or to be specific, flowchart is a graphical representations used to illustrate the step-by-step process of an algorithm. Now, if we look into the task given to write a program, to take two numbers as input, to calculate their sum, and to display the result, we can actually turn this into an algorithm with 3 steps. So obviously, the first step again is to take two numbers. The second step is to calculate their sum. And the third step is to display the result. We can actually represent this in the form of flowchart, as you can see on your right. So we have a program with a start, and then you ask for the user input, or in this case, you can initialize two variables. Then we move on to do the calculations. We calculate the total, where total is equal to number 1 plus number 2. And then we output the total, and finally we end the program. So this is a very simple form of flowchart. And if you would like to draw a flowchart, you need to first understand some of the basic symbols involved in a flowchart. We have 6 elements or symbols here. The first one is the oval shape, which indicates the start and also the end. You have the parallelograms, which indicates the input, a rectangle, which represents the process, a diamond shape, which indicates a decision, which is not shown in this flowchart yet. We're going to learn that later on, no worries about that. And also a hybrid shape, which indicates the output. And of course, we also have the flow line, which represent how one process or one input flow from one to another. In some other resources, you might find out that the input and output actually have the same shape. For example, in some resources, they say that the parallelograms represent both the input and output. So that's totally fine. It's depend on what are the resources that we are referring to. But in our case, we use parallelograms to represent input and a hybrid shape to indicate the output. So once we have the flowchart, then we can actually turn that into codings. In this case, the example shown here is Java codes, where if you can see, we have the input here. Rather than asking user to input two numbers, in this case, we just want to simplify it. So we just initialize two variables here, number 1, number 2, with number 5 and also 6. And we have, remember, this is the process here. We turn the process into a simple line of code where we do the calculations. And finally, the output, right, where we do system.out.println total, which means we display the result. So basically, whenever you are asked to approach or solve a task, you can break it down into 3 steps. So the first step is you are given the questions, you break it down into a few subtasks. So here we have 3 subtasks, 1, 2, 3. And then we move on to step 2, where in this case, we draw a flowchart to illustrate the algorithms. Of course, you can use pseudocode or you can use other methods. But of course, because we are focusing on flowchart, the example shown here is flowchart. And from the flowchart, we then convert that into coding. And again, in our example, this is Java codes. Some of you may ask, can I skip step 2 and I straight away go from step 1 to step 3? Of course you can. But just imagine that if you are given a much more complicated programs or much more complex tasks to solve, then it will be always best to first develop the algorithms here, right? In step 2 here, develop an algorithm before you move on to do the coding. I hope through this short tutorial, you will have a better understanding of Flowchart. Thank you very much.